안녕하세요. 남대문에서 열심히 두피문신을 수련하고 있는 서원장입니다. Scalp Micro USA 사장님이신 맷 아이로라는 분의 영상인데요. 이분이 뉴욕에서 활동하고 계신 두피문신 전문가예요. 저희가 두피문신할 때 3P를 많이 쓰는데 1P를 썼을 때 생길 수 있는 그런 부작용들, 또 요즘에 유행하고 있는 두피 페인팅이 있어요. 그 바늘 자체가 1P 바늘이 여러 개가 달린 바늘을 가지고 시술을 하는 거거든요.
Hi everyone, I'm Matt Iulo, the owner of Scalp Micro USA, and today is going to be all about the needles for scalp micropigmentation. Those that are maybe unfamiliar with permanent makeup, cosmetic tattooing, or even traditional tattooing, that there are a large variety of different types of needles on the market and different configurations of needles on the market. And this depends on what the artist is doing. If the artist is doing traditional tattoo work, they're going to require certain configurations, whether that is a larger shader type needle, a magnum, a slope, a liner type needle.
슬로프 라이너 이런 것들은 문신할 때 쓰는 다양한 형태의 바늘들이거든요.
These all have their purpose in tattooing. And even as we cross over to our world, which is considered permanent makeup, cosmetic tattooing, hair cosmetic tattooing, scalp micropigmentation, we are going to decide on a specific type of needle that will deliver the results and those replicated hair follicles that we are after. In scalp micropigmentation, it is important to know that your artist should be using a 3-round liner configuration. This often is denoted as a 3RL on the box that you buy.
박스에 3RL이 아니라 3SL이라고 표현되어 있는 박스도 있어요. SL은 쉐이드 라이너라고 바늘이 살짝 이렇게 벌어져 있기 때문에 약간 점이 번지게 하거나 퍼트리는 그런 거를 할 때 쓰는 바늘이거든요. 그래서 저희는 꼭 RL이 표시되어 있는 바늘을 써야 됩니다.
Whatever brand you use, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that 3-round liner indicates. But that is definitely the configuration that the majority of scalp micropigmentation artists are going to choose to use, and that's because it delivers the best results, it allows for the best retention, and it is typically the safest type of needle to deliver onto the scalp. But before we move on, I do want to address something. I sometimes get asked by clients, they read online, there's a little bit of misinformation out there. They might say, Matt, well, do you ever use a 1RL? Do you recommend a single needle? And that's what they're referring to when they say a 1RL is a single rather than the 3RL, which are tiny 3-spoke needles that come to a single tip. And my answer is no. I do not recommend 1RL single needles for scalp micropigmentation, and I'll tell you why. Many people think that using the single needle will actually deliver a better, more refined, detailed look. And this is really not the case. In fact, the single needle, because it is so sharp and so tiny, it ends up actually causing a lot of skin inflammation and a lot of irritation and bleeding. And a lot of bleeding can actually really hurt the long-term and short-term retention.
잦은 출혈이 잉크에 유지력에 영향을 끼친다는 게 출혈이 일어나면 잉크도 같이 나오기 때문에 점이 표현이 안 된다는 그런
that you get with the pigment. There's just not enough ink on that tip of that needle that once the body goes through its healing process, you'll actually get a hold of color. Anything that an artist or you as a client may think is a benefit to a 1RL, and I'm guessing that means, tiny little replicated follicles, we can do that with the 3RL. In fact, many of the 3RL needles that we use actually have a smaller gauge size, and that means a smaller diameter at the tip than a lot of 1RLs. So in fact, you're actually getting a smaller diameter.
바늘 3개가 붙어 있기 때문에 사실 지름이 작아지는 그런 효과가 있어요.
But the 3RL is safer to use and actually is a little bit easier on the skin, and a client can expect better retention over the 2, 3, sometimes 4 sessions that it does take to finish a scalp micropigmentation treatment. Okay, so what does a 3RL mean? What kind of configuration is that? And we kind of touched on this just earlier, but a 3RL indicates that it's a 3-round liner, which is a configuration very popular in both cosmetic tattooing and traditional tattooing. And it essentially means that there's 3 little micro spokes or micro needles that come to a single point. And I'll kind of do this with my finger and show you on the screen what that looks like in detail. But these 3 single spokes will come to a single tip, and that allows us to a certain diameter, a certain gauge, okay? And there are a variety of gauges that can be used in both scalp micropigmentation and in tattooing in general. Personally, what I have loved to use and what a lot of my artists in my Scalp Micro USA shops use are 3RL 0.18 millimeters and 3RL 0.20 millimeters. And that 0.18, that 0.20, and there's even a 0.25. There's even a smaller one, which is a 0.15 millimeter, which sometimes we use. That just indicates the gauge size, how wide or thick that diameter is. And when I say wide or thick, I want you to know that all those gauges that I just mentioned, they're super, super tiny, because obviously the goal is to create a very tiny little replicated follicle, a little dot. We work as pointillism artists. So pointillism, for those that are unaware, is the creation of color and density using tiny little dots. Okay, that's essentially what we're doing on your scalp or in the areas that need fuller looking hair. So what gauge size your artist will use is really up to them, and it's also based on the thickness and the diameter of your existing hair follicle. Certain individuals will have very coarse, thick hair, or maybe darker skin, and that artist may choose to use a 3RL, but with a slightly higher gauge size, maybe a 0.20 millimeter, maybe a 0.25 millimeter. For those that have very thin hair, very light skin, or even some gray, blonde type hair, where their follicles are a little bit more fine and dispersed, your artist will maybe go down in gauge size to a 0.18 or even a 0.15 millimeter. I've actually loved using the 3RL 0.15s recently from FYT, and I'll talk a little bit about the brands. I love using FYT needles. They have been great for scalp micropigmentation. They've been a great partner of ours, so I do love FYT, but there are several other brands that are great. With that all said, I've actually been using the 0.15s, very, very tiny, for areas in the front edge of a hairline to create that very soft, broken, gradient type result that a lot of clients are after right now. They want that very light delineation between their forehead and hairline, and we're able to create that with smaller gauge needles. They're like a paintbrush for your scalp artist, okay?
시청해주셔서 감사합니다. 네, 다음 주에 또 좋은 영상을 가지고 찾아뵙겠습니다. 구독과 좋아요 부탁드리겠습니다. 감사합니다.